Iceland operates in an open economy system, which is relatively small compared to other global markets. The economy is founded in energy, aluminum, tourism, and fishing. Given its location, there's a high standard of living both environmentally and socially. After the recession of 2008, more value was entrusted to environmental protection and an environmentally conscious economy. This is because most of the economic transactions to occur in Icelandic economy are based on the environment and its resources. GDP, or gross domestic product, measures the total value of all final goods and services produced in an economy during a given year. It does not include the value of intermediate goods. The current GDP of Iceland is 16.15 billion, and the GDP real growth rate is 4.9%. Here's a chart for the GDP of Iceland from years 1960 to 2013. Much of Iceland's economy is tied to the fishing industry, and, as a result, GDP is closely related to the well-being of the industry. GDP increased by approximately 4% each year after the war. However, by 1987, economic growth slowed because of limited fish catches. This decreased the GDP growth rate to half of the previous value. According to the CIA World Factbook, the GDP composition by sector of origin is 5.9% agriculture, 20.4% industry, and 73.7% services, based off of 2016 estimates.
For physical capital, the markets are mainly divided between fishing and manufacturing. Fishing is a huge part of its population and the effect of the GDP because the economy kind of fluctuates with the price of the fishes. For example, back in the late 80s, when fishing was kind of getting more enforced and the populations were down, the GDP went from 4% to only 0.5% for that year. Other markets that thrive off fishing include the shipping docks, boat repairs, fishing tools, and the processing in the fishing markets. Farming has to rely on fishing too because most of the land is volcanic in the area, so only about 5% of the population is actually in agriculture, which gives the other 10% of the population willing to be enforced in the fishing market. Other manufacturers are aluminum, which is a big deal. They do a lot of processing in there and ship it to all sorts of places in the EU and America, and some other small minerals that are found with the volcanic that are with steel production and making filters for the area. Another industry that's starting to really boom is the tourism. Back in the 2008 when they were struggling, I think they really ramped up the tourism due to their very natural resources that they have with hot springs, volcanic mountains, and other pretty natures. And the other big part of physical capita is the infrastructure. Their infrastructure took a while to modernize. It wasn't until the late 1900s that they even got a telegram. So a lot of the paved roads are only in the urban districts. And outside of that, the rural roads are really just still gravel roads that people use horses on. And most of the other forms of transportation are within the shipping docks and boats. There is no railroads, no other sort of transportation. It's mainly just urban roads and boats.
For technology and environment, these two things go hand in hand with each other because some of the technological advancements are based off of energy sources that benefit the environment. 2.2 of Iceland's GDP is spent on research and development for technology and innovation improvements. And some of these improvements that have been researched are better ways to produce geothermal energy and better ways to produce hydroelectricity, which both benefit the long-run economic growth of Iceland. Right here is the GDP spent on research and development from 2000 to 2016. As you can see, there's a major drop in the percent GDP spent starting around 2009, which goes side by side to the US recession. Now, in Iceland, renewable energy sources accounted for 85% of the total primary energy supply in 2012, which is more than any country. By this happening, it positively benefits the long-run growth in Iceland. Also, Iceland has introduced new environmentally related taxes, including a diesel tax, a carbon tax, and a CO2-based vehicle tax. These taxes cause revenue to fall 2.2% from their actual GDP, which negatively affected their long-run growth. It did, however, positively affect the environment because less emissions were being created.
Per human capita, the population has mainly been growing at around 1 to 3% for the past decade or two. The current population is around 323,000, and which that means since the 2000s, it's only really grown around 40,000 in population-wise. The unemployment is also pretty steady, around a 2 to 4% population due to the small island and industries being on the island. It's not hard for them to really have a mass unemployment issue. But around the time of the recession in 2008, the unemployment rate actually spiked up around fluctuating in between 8 and 10%, causing more unemployment than usual, and it took around 10 years for it to find its way back to the 2 to 4%.
For productivity, the income per capita in Iceland is lower than most Nordic countries and around the OECD average, reflecting a lower level of labor productivity. To improve this, Iceland has in place labor market tests for temporary services suppliers who may stay in the country for up to 12 months on their first permit. Iceland thus has ample room to lift barriers to sharpen competition through trade. The introduction in 2014 of a bilateral trade agreement with China is a step in this direction. The government has also recently expressed a willingness to create a more business-friendly environment in Iceland to raise productivity and GDP per capita growth. Boosting competition should be an important element of any strategy to achieve this objective. One example of this is the productivity in sectors more exposed to competition, such as energy-intensive metal production, which is very high in Iceland. In addition to benefiting the economy through greater efficiency, stronger competition would help to lower prices and increase the quality and variety of products and services through innovation. Now, in 2009, Iceland fell into a deep recession that was caused partially from the US recession. Iceland's banks created the whole crisis when they used $100 billion in debt to finance foreign acquisitions. That amount dwarfed Iceland's GDP of $14 billion. Then the 2008 global financial crisis shut down the bank lending. These banks' financial collapse brought down the country's economy. Iceland's three largest banks had defaulted on $62 billion of foreign debt. The bank's collapse sent foreign investors out of Iceland, which sent the krona down 50% in 1 week. The stock market fell 95% and almost every business in Iceland went bankrupt. A $10 billion bailout was negotiated from the IMF to ensure Iceland's bank deposits. On top of that, Iceland asked its neighbors Luxembourg, Belgium, and the UK to ensure bank deposits of the branches in their countries. Iceland's economic collapse affected the rest of Europe since Iceland's banks had expanded their retail services into Europe and invested in foreign countries.
Western is